which is really up for me right now, as well as my mom's attendance in the Duck Lake Convent and my grandmother in the boarding school in Wisconsin. So many issues up around that for me right now. I'm currently practicing as a therapist and an art therapist, and I am the lead on the Indigenous programming at the Wheat Institute and a prolific artist. I guess that's my first and favorite part of my life right now is I get to be a prolific artist. And I did want to share one of my art pieces. I'm not sure if it can come up now, Kalia, the self-portrait. If that's still working or not working.
We have switched platforms, so that might be a bit. Oh, here it looks like it's going to happen. There we go.
Oh, wrong one. Okay, here's the right one. Yeah, so I just wanted to share just an opening self-portrait around two-spirited identity and the juggling that we all do between all the different identities and all the different people in our communities. And seeing as we were talking about the balance of the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical, I thought I would create a piece to just kind of represent that for myself with all of the elements. You can see I'm standing on the infinity, which is my ancestors, and have the water, the fire, the air, and the earth supporting me. So I just wanted to just kind of give a glimpse. This is my COVID friendly new art form. I started it the first day of the COVID lockdown, not this piece, but creating with food. And so this is done with food and medicines in a kind of pour and see what shows up and then add to it. So it has like coffee, blueberry, various kinds of foods in there. So I just wanted to start with that, and I hope to share a few more pieces of art through our time together today. So thank you very much for hosting to the National Truth and Reconciliation, and happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And finally, Brielle, would you like to let folks know a little bit about you?
Hello, can everybody hear me great?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Dante ni wagomagana. Brielle need to see the Augusta necessary then Wakaskin, neither Otsi necessary. Winnipeg need to see I am. Hello, my name is Brielle Beardy-Linklater. I come from the Nisitawisi Cree Nation, also known as the land of the kind, loving spirit. Also from Kishtiwasi and Ininawak Cree First Nation, York Landing, York Factory First Nation. From Northern Manitoba, I am a Twospirit Cree advocate, activist, anti water and land protector, somebody who is reclaiming Cree pedagogy and Cree worldview as a young millennial, trying to navigate our settler colonial world. Also writing poetry, exploring art as a medium to help me express and to reclaim like our voice as a modern youth. So it's really humbling to be in the same space as Jean Graveline, because I've actually read her book a little bit. And basically I serve as an advocate here in Winnipeg because I'm from Northern Manitoba. So for me, it's like I'm in the heart of the colonial belly. So here I am fighting in the streets, fighting hydro, fighting against the Manitoba government and their poor decisions that they've made during the duration of this pandemic. So mostly I'm politically involved in terms of grassroots activism. I say that I'm a warrior of the heart. I protect the people. I mostly protect my two-spirit and transgender relatives. I advocate for two-spirit and transgender narratives to be told within like Indian spaces. I think that's like where the greatest, my greatest attributes are right now, is that I'm tackling transphobia, femophobia within Indian country, and talking about things that have been long ignored, conversations that have long need to be had within Indian country. So being a champion, breaking cycles, that's who I am. So Ginanak Commitnan for having me here today. Really excited to share space with you all.
Thank you so much. So you can tell by these introductions that you're in for a great discussion. I will briefly introduce myself. I have boiled myself down into one sentence. I am a queer, indigenous, recovered lawyer turned feminist comic who was raised by bikers in the wilds of northern New Brunswick. So that's kind of all you need to know about me. As we go along, I am going to let you know that I am in an apartment building here in Toronto where it has been perfectly quiet all morning. And just as we went live, somebody has decided to drill into the air duct system. So every now and then you're going to hear a drilling sound, although I have a directional mic. I hope it's going to cut down on it, but I apologize in advance. So I'm going to start by asking a question. And what we're going to do is, so we've got sort of this broken up into themes. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists a different question within each of those themes. So we're going to start with the first set of questions, which is about what they've observed in their communities over the past year, including challenges, movements. And I want to start with this question. From what you've observed and experienced, what has been the biggest challenge for the queer communities over this past year? And Jean, I'm gonna direct that one to you, or Dr. J, as I'm gonna call you through this. Oh, just unmute yourself. There you go. Oh, somebody else unmuted you and then you got muted again.
Okay, there I go again. I thought we were starting with a response to the recent news.
Oh, sorry, did I skip a part?
Yeah, so I'm a bit confused. I can move on to that, but
no, you go ahead and address that. I just didn't see that in my notes, so
okay.
Go ahead and address that.
Okay, so we were going to open into this idea of how were we feeling impacted by the recent news of the Kamloops and also of the Marival.
Okay, they didn't put that in my notes, but why don't we do that?
Okay, yeah, okay. I had suggested it go in. I hope the other speakers had got the change of the notes, but I myself have been really deeply impacted. I did introduce myself as a survivor and a descendant of survivors. And, you know, up until this point, I haven't really spent a lot of time introducing myself in that way. It's just been kind of like a moving on process. But this most recent news has been really emotionally overwhelming in some ways. And I did I did participate as the Atlantic coordinator when the Indigenous residential school settlement process was rolled out here in Atlantic Canada, and then also was part of the TRC national counseling team. So it's like so many stories that came up during that process are repercolating back for me. You know, and also the stories I lived through myself and that I heard from my mother, not my grandmother. She didn't speak much about her experience, but it's just really a time that as a nation, I feel that we really have to stop in our tracks and really reconsider where we are and who we are, and you know, what are we here to do at this time? Why are the children coming back to the surface? Why are the children, you know, returning to us at this particular time? And so I have been speaking and supporting a lot of people in my various roles as a teacher and as a helper across the country on this matter in recent days and weeks. And I think the most important concern for me has become sustainability. You know, for those of us on the front lines of trying to address this, it's like, how do we continue to sustain our own energy in order to support and sustain others? So I just wanted to bring that forward today. I have been leaning into my arts practices heavily around working on this. And I wanted to share an image that I did the day of the Kamloops news, which I think is still really visible today. And it's called The Recent Horrific News, which is also with my new COVID art materials. And it's really attempting to address the shock and horror, the porcupine hairdo, but also the multi-layers of grief and anger, and trying to see the light, or trying to see beyond this, or trying to see with this and through this. I used a lot of different layers of medicine in this with the colors, and did write it's about 22 minutes, poetic inquiry that goes along with it. And I've used this piece in the Healing Arts Institution I'm working for and with right now. It's in Winnipeg, actually, the old home country. It's up on their website now with the poetic inquiry, and I recorded it. And I think we can post the link for the gallery in the chat, or maybe up. And I just want to really encourage everyone that's been impacted by the news, both the news of Kamloops and also Maryville more recently, to art and create about your feelings, and to send them into the gallery. And we'll be curating that and sharing that with Canada and the world as it happens. I guess as far as my two-spirited identity, the news also has me really thinking about how much shame we were all subject to, and how much evilization of our beings, our bodies, our sexuality we were subject to in those schools. And it's made me start to really think about my mom's own sexual or gender identity. She was known in her school as Roughhouse Balfour at the Duck Lake Convent, because she would always like tackle bullies and try to, protect other people in the schools. And, I wonder about her two-spiritedness, and think, many of our mothers and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our grandfathers as well, really didn't have the opportunity to come out and be who they were. And a lot of that has to do, and many of our youth today are struggling with their own identities, and even to save their own lives because of the missionization process. So I wanted to put a little call out to the TRC at this time too, to, what about including two-spirited in the calls for action? What about bringing a group of two-spirited together to talk about what can the TRC be doing to enliven that history, the history of our two-spirited people, as part of the TRC memorial, both the history archives, but also, we're having this talk today, and there was another talk, but how can we also enliven this in other ways? I'd just be curious to see some next steps in moving forward with that. So that's what I really just wanted to open with. Thanks for your patience, Candy. I didn't realize it hadn't gotten into your script, and I hope it has made it into Denise's or Brielle's.
We're going to check that now. Thank you so much. I just want to let folks know who are watching, Reconciliation Canada is doing a call for critical response. It's happening every Saturday and Tuesday evening, so there will be one tonight. I'm moderating it. It's a Zoom stream open to everyone over the next 8 weeks, and there are resources that will be presented there if you are dealing with some trauma right now around this. And we are also calling on resources, because the first panel on Saturday, the folks that were there are the people who deal on some of these helplines, and they are being inundated and overwhelmed. And there has not been additional resources put in place. So you can go to Reconciliation Canada's Instagram or Facebook or wherever and click the Zoom if you want to watch that this evening. So Denise, did you want to say some opening words about the recent developments?
Certainly, and my mom went to, they were called the dorms, some of them here in Labrador, and I just think of the impact that those things had on me, about being taught to be quiet, to be small, to be hidden, and that certainly was not within my nature to sort of shy away, but it came with this tremendous amount shrinking, like, so I'm supposed to be feminine, but that doesn't really where my body seems to fit itself, or my spirits. Like, I had no understanding of any of my two-spiritness until well into my, early 30s, before this world started to open up, and I finally felt like I have found a place, like I have found, a circle that I feel belongs, that I can belong in. So I think, I've been talking a lot with my family, and then to have the unearthing of bodies, and I just, there's a grief, there's a deep heaviness and grief that comes of what could have been. And then to know how many who did make it home, how the grief then of what was still lost. So it's this perpetuated sort of trauma. And in that, where do we find strength? Where do we lean into ceremony? How do we, like, the things that are happening and changing? So I try to remain hopeful, but I also allow myself to grieve. And I look at my community around me, and that's what I see. I see, Indigenous people responding in a way of really holding that grief closer. And then I see allies trying to understand or see where they fit into that as well. And so there's a counterbalance that seems to be happening in Turtle Island, and I feel like a fire has been started, and hopefully that fire will bring action, right? Because that seems to be the thing when we hear things that just sort of rock us. But then where's the movement, the action? Where's the way that we keep it going forward? So it reminds me of when I first started to understand Two-Spirit teachings and history, and thinking of this loss, that how different my life would have looked had I not been in this colonial place where I was told everything about me was wrong. How differently could have childhood have been. But at the same time, I have to, trust Father Sky, Mother Earth. I'm here where I am. And these two spirits have formed the way they have formed. And I'm very at peace in my life and in myself now. So I guess it's, I try not to question, but there's moments certainly. And when we hear of this, then there's an anger, there's a grief, there's a whole process that's happening that hopefully leads to healing. So and then knowing there's, the schools that were here in Labrador, and then hearing some people who say, can't imagine that they'd find anything like that here. And I'm like, hold on now. It's very much, it's so there's as much as I know that the reality is that we're probably going to find bodies here. There's also that sort of fear of what happens then. How do we mark? How do we honor? How do we move forward? So I think there's probably a lot of people within our nation thinking that and feeling that. So I'm trying to be gentle with myself in this time, I guess.
Thank you for that, Denise. And what you just said about people saying, oh, I can't imagine that happened here. I'm fortunate to be on a number of national television programs, and I've been trying to push home the idea of people saying, I can't believe that happened then. And I'm trying to remind people it is happening now, that there are more children being taken right now than in the entire history of residential schools, and that we have to be conscious of that. And it's not just never again, it has to stop before we can ever say never again. So I'm glad that you're pushing that message out there as well. Brielle, would you like to say some opening comments?
Yes, in regards to the recent news about the children being discovered at residential schools across so-called Canada, we've known for a while that these bodies existed. For those of us who are descendants of residential school attendees, for me, it's both of my parents and their parents, so both sets of my grandparents. I do carry that intergenerational trauma, and what my perspective is how can I, as a millennial, as a younger person, support my older relatives who've been through this horrific ordeal, and how can I support community members who don't have access to kind of healing supports, the kind of same supports that those of us with privilege do. If you're sitting here on this computer screen with the internet access, I imagine you have some level of privilege. All of us do. So in light of this news, I've been trying to think about ways I can support my community. How can I make my healing on the same frequency as those that are hurting around me, those that use substances and alcohol to cope? How can I have empathy for those who've not been taught to cope pretty well? I think it's been a really hard place from where I've been seeing it. Truthfully, like as I say this, I'm getting choked up because it's been hard because we have to be so strong for our families, for our children, because we're carrying so much just as Native people. In one vessel, I carry so much responsibility. I have the responsibility to be anti-racist, to be a good relative, to learn, to listen from the younger ones as the world evolves. I just see so much happening in our world right now, and as somebody who is a frequent user of social media, it's also really hard to see my trauma, being triggered day in and day out. I think this is also for me, like, I want to make a call out to our Indigenous relatives, to our Native relatives, to carry our traumas and the traumas of our families and our loved ones responsibly, with love and with care. I think this is a time where we need to be in ceremony with our kin, reclaiming kinship, which was like, on the subject of residential schools. This is the source. This was the beginning of erasure for two-spirit people and beings. The two-spirit term is a contemporary one to embody the terms and roles that our people once had held traditionally. This is the source of our gendering.
Keep your phone up. Keep your phone up.
Sorry. So the two-spirit erasure started with these residential schools. So this trauma hits hard for all of us. But for me, it's not just me, it's my family. It's not just me grieving. I'm grieving for my family as well. I'm grieving for my mother, my father, for my grandmother, my parents, my grandparents, and the spirit world. And I've seen people, make the most beautiful art. I've seen beautiful poetry written. I've seen acts of love and honoring, but I've also seen not blatant acts of disrespect, but like been on TikTok and I've been watching younger Indigenous youth like do this with their phones while they're asking their grandparents or parents conversations about residential school. And I think we should be careful about what we put out to the world and how we go about this, because this is not a walk in the park for any of us. I think this news is bringing up so much that we've been advocating for years. As for those of us who are social justice warriors, we've been talking about the harmful impacts that residential school played and how it was a tool in our colonization. And we got to remember our resilience and that we're here in this time for a reason, to be able to sing our songs, to be able to make the medicine, to be able to pray to our Creator, and to be here to hold each other. I think, sorry, I put my phone down again, and I'm frozen. Am I still clear to everybody right now, Candy?
We can hear you, but you just got to try to remember to keep that phone up.
Okay. Thank you. So, on that note, the gendering that is enforced on our two-spirit community started with these residential schools, and the gendering dictates what supports and accesses we have as two-spirit people today. And I'm thinking about my relatives who are living on the streets, and I'm thinking about all my relatives living in the trap houses, to all my relatives living out in the bush, to those who don't have access to support that most of us do. And I really think this is a time for the different levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, to step up and add emotional and wellness supports for our relatives right now at this time. I think our communities need it the most because we've historically been excluded from all sorts of legislations historically. When 2008 happened, when Stephen Harper gave his apology, I remember that being a very pivotal moment in my youth and my upbringing, because that was really when I started to realize, like, my parents both went to residential school, and I'm affected by this because I had to sit and listen to the testimonies that were being given. And I don't think it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm trying to figure out how I fit into all of this. How can I be a good relative? As the first person in my family, the first generation that has not gone to residential school or day school. I totally have a different role in all of this. And for me, it's to figure that role, to mentor, to keep my community close, to practice kinship, and to ensure that we're all doing okay. I think this is a time that we need to be connecting with relatives, to making those phone calls to check in. And yeah, I
That's
think
wonderful, Brielle. I'm going to cut you there only because I have the horrible job of trying to keep us on track. And we've got a lot of incredible things to talk about this afternoon. And now our time has gotten shorter because we've added the front piece. So I am going to come in from time to time to try to shorten you up. As I ask these questions, friends, try to keep your questions to under 4 minutes. 4 minutes now. And I know that's hard, but that's the reality of the world that we're in. We only have so much time to be on this Zoom together. So I am going to, without hesitation, jump right in, and I'll re-ask Jean the question that I asked a little while ago, just to remind her. It is, from what you have observed and experienced, what has been the biggest challenge the LGBTQ2S plus communities have faced over the past year?
Well, I think for me and my world, isolation has been a large challenge in terms of not being able to access the spaces and places where I have in the past had a sense of belonging, connection, my own beauty, my own spirit, had my own gifts honored within those communities. And I think even though we can Zoom with each other, it's difficult to replace body-to-body contact. The love of our hearts together, sharing food, sharing space, sharing ceremony, sharing songs, sharing dancing together. It's really hard to shift that. And I think as a result of isolation, there's been a lot of mental health challenges that have been experienced within our two-spirited community and within our gay and lesbian communities. And, possibly within that, I don't have any stats on this. This is just what I witness and hear. Maybe more addictions surfacing, more challenges in the mainstream community. There's been a lot more violence within relationships, and relationships, it's been challenging for many people to be with that one person and just stay in that dyad and not have the whole community to be surrounding and connecting and being together. And I think for many young people, and I'm so glad to see you here, Brielle, it's beautiful to hear you. For many young people, I support some therapists that are supporting others, especially up north. And, the rates of suicide, I think, have pretty much escalated within our transing and two-spirit identifying, gender fluid, youth populations. And I think in part that is also related to isolation, and also goes back to just what you were saying a few minutes ago, Brielle, and what I referenced at the beginning around the evilizing of our identities, of our sexuality, and of our identities as two-spirit, that when we can't connect with others in a loving way, our two-spirit elders join in on events where we feel held and loved and a sense of belonging. And therefore, we're in just our own spaces and in our communities where sometimes we are not accepted and not loved and evilized still to this day. It's been very challenging. And so I would say for me in my work, that's probably been a large challenge, is figuring out how do we get support in, and how can we send love, and what replaces face-to-face ceremony and connection. What replaces that? How do we generate that in the face of all of these restrictions? So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Jean. I don't think anything can replace it.
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 days ago, I lost my oldest sister, who's also two-spirited. Her and her partner were together for 30 years. And I feel that lockdown had a big part to do with her passing. She was a recovered addict.
Mm-hmm.
she was, you know, she had some health issues, but she broke a hip. And when she broke a hip, she ended up in the hospital and there was very limited visitation. And my sister is a very loving, kind person who lives for her friends and family. And she just didn't have the support to climb up out of that bed and ended up passing on Saturday at the young age of 71. So yeah, I think we need all kinds of extra support to help us through this time. So thank you for raising that. Brielle, oh, see, there's my timer going. Brielle, I'm going to go to you next with this question. How has COVID-19 pandemic impacted your community?
How has this COVID pandemic impacted my community? That's such a loaded question, Candy. 4 minutes. Okay. Well, firstly, I belong to so many communities being marginalized. I'm Two-Spirit. I'm transgender. I'm Cree. I'm also living in Winnipeg's central neighborhood, close to the north end. So I see things a lot differently from where I am, and in terms of what I think supports are needed. Well, I live under Manitoba conservative leadership, so I'll just say that. So severely lacking, severely overlooked, severely excluded. I'm not going to say underrepresented because I think we're purposely excluded from a lot of the supports that our cisgender relatives get to enjoy, as well as our like heterosexual relatives. In terms of health, I mean, like we've seen a lot of injustice happen in just the like 2 years that we've been in pandemic. I think the world is really like, you know how Denise was talking about like fires being ignited across. I think there's literal fires being ignited in our communities right now. Like, you know, it's so hard to think really right now because I can name a number of issues. We touched on the mental well-being. We touched on like substance use and addictions. Talked about how can we show love when we're not even allowed to be like near each other right now because we have to worry about health and wellness. So for me, it's about how can I be a good relative? And well, like I think in my generation, we're battling the anti-vaxxers and the COVID deniers. So for me, telling my relatives to get vaccinated, sharing those important information about like health, because a lot of our communities do get sucked up into conspiracy theory, and that's just due to the quality of education that is provided to our people. So we just have to be really good relatives and focus on mutual aid, reclaiming our indigenous way of like connecting with each other, like decolonizer, the way we eat our food and how we see food in each other, our connection with each other, our connection with Mother Earth and the waters and animal world, all of that. I really think we rely, if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we need to rely on ourselves and most of all each other, because that's at the end of the day who we have is each other. And I think if anything, this pandemic has been a challenge for those who've like in our Two-Spirit, in our LGBTQ communities, we're granted chosen families. And I think this has been a time for, especially for like people like me who, like I was born in the 90s, brought up as a kid in the 2000s and experienced my adulthood in the 2010. So I had quite a bit to learn about what family meant as a Two-Spirit Cree trans woman and how I see my relatives. So it's learning how to advocate for not just myself, but for the people around me, and really thinking about like, well, my needs are being met, but where are others being ignored, and how can I help, and how can we help? It's basically how can we turn I into we, and how can we see ourselves as part of like a bigger community and bringing that community together. And like in terms of Winnipeg, I've seen like a lot of mutual aid efforts pop up. I've been seeing a lot of people posting on Facebook and Instagram like leftover food, and seeing people like share groceries and do grocery runs for other people. I think this is like, we're seeing like things we haven't seen in a long time. And according to my elders, there's like a new old way that's coming up right now. And I'm really excited for that. So I think right now I'm not trying to think about like, 'cause I think we're going to be purposely like excluded from a lot of the help that's coming from federal and provincial governments. I think we need to focus on how can we strengthen where we're being ignored.
Thank you so much. You know what I really love about this panel? I love how we're geographically spread, and I love how our ages are spread. And it's just really interesting to hear those different perspectives. And Brielle, I'm so happy you brought up this conspiracy theory thing, because I'm dealing with that a lot as well, and trying to get people to understand that, you know, health professionals are telling us what vaccines can do for us. And to me, that's how we protect our elders, by getting vaccinated. So thank you for raising that. Denise, for you in this topic, I want to ask, how have the global movements like the call to defund the police, environmental activism such as water and land defense, gender-based violence awareness for the Two-Spirit community, and work around missing and murdered women and girls, how has all of that impacted your community?
And that's, I remember this question. It's so big. It's huge. Yeah. And in 4 minutes. So for myself, the work that I've been, because I always say I can't speak for a community. I can speak from my experience. You know, I'm one Two-Spirit amongst many, and I never try to say that what comes out of my mouth. I ask the ancestors to give me voice. That's, and I hope for the best. But when it comes to these large movements, and what I've seen, and I've been very involved in land and water protection over the past decade. And so it was just like the brakes hit to what we were able to do, but it did not slow down government and corporations. So that's probably one of the things that I've noted the most in all of the different movements that are happening. We have restrictions about how we can gather and get together, but it has not slowed them down. Like they're still, you know, the work camps stayed open, you know, like they're, that side of things. And that's what I've noticed. It almost feels like part of it, even though I understand and certainly accept it's a pandemic and we needed to be careful, but how easily a sort of a lockdown impacted our ability to mobilize. And so then how do we mobilize? And we're seeing that we're still finding ways. And I think that speaks to the resiliency of community, of Two-Spirit, of water and land protectors, of us, of you know, who push back, who say, no, this is not okay, we don't settle with this, and we're really, you know, part of that reconciliation. We are part of that healing. So it's the determination that comes through to not be slowed down. So one of the things I noticed very quickly was how fast we all trained to an online world, where suddenly there was, you know, teach-ins and webinars, and well, even what we're doing right now, how that just pulled up in big gears of how do we work together. And in some ways, because some of the things around, I mean, these have been issues since colonial contact. These are not new issues to this time frame, but the amount of awareness and information that's getting out because of, I feel like more people are tuned in online, has changed how quickly we can disseminate information. I mean, myself, very much involved in fighting back against mega hydro here in Labrador. Brielle, I was really glad you brought that up, because Manitoba, we have huge allies there, because the lessons that we should have learned, that should have been learned by this nation, but what they've learned is how to ground us, how to still push past, how to put corporate agendas ahead of Indigenous health and well-being and community and waterways. And I always say that while we have a huge focus on trying to stop pipelines, we have very few free-flowing rivers left because of mega hydro, and we're not really talking about that. It's like the best kept secret in Canada amongst many other colonial things that are happening here. So one of the things that happened for many of us land protectors here, we were involved in the court system, and all of a sudden everything halted, right? So the courts closed down, so we couldn't move. Like you know, I've been convicted of 3 different civil charges, and I literally had to wait 2 years to get back into a courtroom so it just takes the steam out, right? And that fear layers in about, well, now there's an injunction. And like I said, the corporations and governments don't stop. So whether that's around creating new policy, so I mean, if we get into things around, you know, policing and gender-based violence, like what do those supports look like in a time frame like this, where we see limitations on capacity of whether it's shelters or how support direct services look like, or asking people to be calling and doing video therapy, and there's so much that shifts, but the colonial tactics don't stop. that's what I noticed the most over this past year, is that they were able to gain momentum, and it kind of had to throw us back to remobilize and reposition. And so now, how do we move forward? I don't know if I'm close to 4 minutes, but I guess it's just such a big issue, and we got to keep at it.
When you hear that little sound, that is the timer going off, just to make it helpful instead of my big voice booming in. Thank you for that. I want to now move to the topic of allyship. And this is an interesting topic because I think for as many Indigenous people or as many Two-Spirited people as there are, there's that many opinions on allyship. And I think when I was interviewing Thomas King with the drop of his last book, it was a big room for 500 people, mostly non-Indigenous. And at the end, a woman stood up and said, well, how can we help? And it was funny because without hesitation, Thomas said, you can get out of our way. We don't need your help. We just need you to stop getting in our way. And of course she was like, kind of like shrinking back down in her seat. But I thought it was such a brave answer. And it was following him talking about how he's not happy despite all of his accomplishments, and he's not happy because of the state the country is still in. So I am going to give you the choice of which of these two questions you want to answer when we look at allyship. So one of the questions is, what does your community need the most at this time, and how can allies support that? So that's one of the questions. So that's like, how do non-Indigenous people become allies? What's the best thing they can do for your community at this time? So you can answer that question, or you can answer the question, what can your friends and family do? What can people even within our community do to support LGBTQ2+ youth? So choosing one of those two approaches, Brielle, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, I was writing a list down because, it's a good question. I'm gonna kind of answer both because I think both are really related. I'll just give my little backwards answer.
Do it in 4 minutes.
That's what I do. That's what you're gonna get from me. Well, in terms of being a good ally, for me, in the first half of my I've had a decade of activism and advocacy. There was this this expectation that I have to always know what was expected of my allies, and sometimes I didn't know because that's not my journey. I don't live through my allies. I don't live vicariously through my allies. Half of the time I'm bolstering support for my own Indigenous community because that's where the fight is. That's where the heart of our movement is within our Indigenous people. And I think if non-Indigenous people are going to support us, I think you need to learn how to do your research firstly. Don't get anything off of some alt-right independent mom Facebook page. Don't get your information about Indigenous information from a source that isn't us firstly. And second of all, study critical race theory. What the hell? For real, study critical race theory. Another one is support Black scholars, support Black literature, because a lot of our anti-racist struggles today were made possible because of the contribution of Black revolutionary literature. Everything that we're doing today, the land back movement, the defund the police, has all been made possible because of Black intellect and Black labor. So I definitely think that our non-Indigenous allies need to recognize that we as Indigenous people see our Black relatives as a part of us too, and their struggles is very much ours as well. And I think learning how to show solidarity with different movements by not centering yourself but amplifying your relatives' voices. And I think that's where I am at right now. It's not how much can I learn, how much can I speak on behalf of other people. It's more so how much can I unlearn myself, relearn what I should have been learning, and then listen. I think being a good listener helps. I think a lot of Indigenous activists over the last century have made many calls to actions, not just our institutions. I know so many individual warriors who great warriors who spoke about what our destiny here as Indigenous people are and what white people have. We already know what we already know the colonial narrative. I just need people I just need non-Indigenous people to own those narratives so you can start your healing work. I really think it's just like non-Indigenous people, start your healing work. That's the call to action. Start your healing work. That's what I have to say.
Isn't that beautiful? And I love how you brought that down with a minute to spare and nailed it. I think the future is looking bright, Brielle, if you represent millennials in general. That is some good deep thinking that you've done around this topic. And I think, you know, before I move on to Jean, I just want to quickly address that, how our families can support. The best way you can support youth, two-spirited youth, is by showing who you are. So when I was a little kid and I had crushes on boys and I didn't know that one day I would meet this beautiful woman and fall in love with her and marry her and walk through 20 years of life with her, I remember my mother coming home one day. My mother was a woman that never cried. My dad and I would cry at commercials. My mother never cried. I came home, my mother was crying at the supper table. She had a little something in front of her and I said, why are you crying? And she didn't want to address it to me, but she said to my father, a young man who had lived near where we lived, who left town when he was 17 because he was gay, and that was just not acceptable in the 70s where I was from. He had written home to his mother to say that he had AIDS. It was in the middle of the when the AIDS was really sweeping across North America. His partner had just died. He was alone in Montreal in a hospice and he was dying. And he asked if he could come home to die. And she said, no. And my mother was crying because my mother said, how can any mother reject their child for any reason, let alone a reason that's stupid? So flash forward 20 years later when I met Denise, and my mother was an old lady then, and people said, are you worried about coming out to your mom? And I said, no, because my mother showed me a long time ago who she is. So I think that's the best thing you can do, because you don't know what child is in your family struggling with the struggle of, do I come out or don't I? And as soon as you show that you are a safe place, you free that child up. So that's my little 2 cents in that. Jean, I turn it over to you now to answer either one of those 2 questions or both within the time.
I'm going to try for both. I just wanted to mention a story about my mother, seeing as we were talking about our mothers. When my cousin became a nun, we were all in the hall after the event, and I found a group of nuns surrounding me saying, oh, we're going to pray for you to come to the convent and seek your vocation. Well, I was devastated at the thought of it all. And so I was over in the corner kind of crying, and my mom came over and said, what's wrong? And I said, well, here's what happened. And she said, just a minute, I'll fix that for you. So she marched across the hall with me in tow to Sister Superior, who had been the Sister Superior when she had been in convent at Duck Lake. And she said to her, this is my daughter. She won't have any problems with poverty. She grew up in poverty and she's not going to have any problem with that. Men, she's never liked them. But you will never get her to obey. If you thought you had problems with me, you'll have twice as many problems with her. So I got off the hook with Sister Superior, and also had my mom's blessing all in one fell swoop for who I didn't yet even know that I would be for my whole life. So that was a blessing. I also just wanted to give a shout out to all of the Two-Spirited that are on the front lines of all of the incredible movements for Earth Mother, for the land, for the water, for sexual justice and ending violence against women and Two-Spirited. You know, like, we are on the front lines and we are very courageous as beings. And I think when you have to push so hard to be brave and courageous in your own life, to embrace your own sexuality and to embrace your own gender as you see it and want to be, I think that gives you a certain power and a certain voice and a certain capacity to, you know, be in your own truth and speak truth to power. And so I really appreciate that about all of the Two-Spirits in the community, that, you know, we do have that gift, and to really exercise that. I think for me, one of the things that I'm, you know, challenged with right now is this lumping of the Two-Spirit, or lumping of all the LGBTQ, you know, on and on community in one lump. And, you know, I'm finding that there is a lot of difference and diversity within the community. There's gender difference, there's tribal difference, there's desires around, how do we manage these things in ancestral ways, in more medicalized ways? Like, how do we cope with our bodies? How do we cope with who we are and what we want to be? And how do we fully come into our own freedom for who we are? And how do we find space with others to be free? And there certainly is a lot of difference in the community around that. And sometimes in the last decade or so, there's also been some conflict within the community. It's not a harmonious community where we all just love and accept each other, unfortunately. And so I would just want to put a call out for all of us as two spirits to find our way into harmonizing with each other, to really listen to each other and to accept that we have come. Like for me, I came out in the 70s and have been in the struggles in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and it's been a different me every decade at least, if not every year or every minute. And so I have identified in a lot of different ways over the years, and I am welcoming of other people's identity, but I would also love to be respected and honored that I can also be the identity that I am, and I can have the history that I've had. And that may not match up with what youth of today need, but I want to be welcoming and accepting and open to what everyone needs. And I think that would be, a great step forward. I just want to mention one other thing is the current Bill C6 that's moving forward in the House of Commons right now to end, I'm just skipping, conversion therapy. In Canada, it's still legal to force people and to make people step into therapy realms that are to convert us from being who we are into being someone else. And there was a recent report where it said that out of BC just this month, that it says that 1 in 10 gay and lesbian two-spirited people have been made to go into therapy for that purpose just in the last number of years. And that's about 50,000 Canadians in general. And so if allies want to pick up on an issue right now, there's some conservative MPs in the House of Commons that are trying to stop this bill. And this bill would be really helpful in therapy circles to start weeding out therapists and people out there that are putting themselves out as helpers to our two-spirited, to our gay and lesbian communities, trans communities, and are actually trying to help us recover from our identities, as opposed to help us coming to be more loving and accepting of our own selves and to find our space in the world. So I just wanted to mention that because it's current news, and it's something that is in my world. I just want to mention something. I have the rainbow flag up behind me. I really, if you're not an ally, if you haven't done your own work to deal with your own homophobia, don't fly the rainbow flag, because it might make us think that you're an ally when in fact you haven't done your own work to recover. And so that's also something that a couple of youth have mentioned to me in schools lately, that counselors are flying the rainbow flag but not really able to be of support. So
that's a great couple of points, Gina. I'm glad that you give something concrete that that allies can grab onto, which is that bill. I'm going to move to Denise now to give your thoughts on this question. And I think we're going to curtail the final set of questions so that we can allow time for the questions from our viewers. So Denise, do you want to choose one of those two or both of them within the 4 minutes?
Absolutely. I do youth work, but I don't just, yes, it is my job. I'm very fortunate that it's my job, but it's my responsibility. And I think that's a big piece of coming back into, like, I see as not just a two-spirit role, but I think all middle generations role is that we have the connecting bridge between the youth and our elders, because there's been such a thorough job to break that intersectionality that we had, where elders and youth were easily connecting. Like that's, so it's, I feel a sense of responsibility. And so the youth that I have the honor to connect with, what I'm seeing more and more is like, we need to pay attention. And when we see that young people are struggling to reach out, to not sort of assume that's somebody else's job to do that, or that I pay attention to social media a lot, and when I see a post, I listen, right? I listen and accept that as truth, and I don't say, oh, this is looking for attention, or there's always like, I mean, I live here in the north, and our suicide rates are heart gut wrenching, and so taking everything seriously, including like that we take action, that we see ourselves as caregivers the way that, and for myself as a two-spirit, knowing that's how it would have been had I not been colonized, you know?
Mhm.
So to come back into that role, to accept that responsibility, to see myself as a safe face, like I tend to tell people a lot, like we create safe spaces, but we need more safe faces. And so how we become that, and you're right, Candy, we live it, right? So I'm very open. And I've also, as Jean had said, like here was the boxes I could fit in growing up, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful fluid spectrum that I can just grow and thrive in. And so being open-minded to hearing youth, what they say, to taking their truths about what it's like at home, and then what it's like when they can be in a space that's really safe, how they can express themselves, like being able to, I'd never go into a room with young people without saying my name and my pronoun, just to sort of set, to allow that. And every time decide afterwards and say, it's my first time I've heard that. That's how I identify too. And so we're able to have these conversations. So I think many times, like, youth have the answers, they're knowledge holders. And in some ways, because of what they've lived, they're better knowledge holders than some of us think that we are, right? So there's wisdom, there's such a wisdom that's there. So I try as much as possible to give sacred space, to allow their voices to just share and connect and be heard. Like I always say, I try not to speak for youth. That's not my place. Youth can speak for you. We still have very like small communities that Christianity is still sort of the trumping. And I say that as someone who's spiritual and who has a family, who has a very strong faith. So I say it a level of respect, but at the same time, we must evolve. So to push at these systems to evolve, that we do not accept institutionalized racism or homophobia or transphobia, that we do not allow these things to be, well, we're still maintaining a status quo. So we push at looking for legislation and what we need to change. We get involved as decision makers. We don't, again, I go back to, so I'll close by return. We have a responsibility. So live in that place of purpose and responsibility. And for anyone who's our allies, you have a responsibility as well. So figure out what that responsibility is. We all have an intended path of purpose, regardless of our ethnicity. So find it, walk it, be it. And I'm sure that's 4 minutes, so I'll stop there.
That is great advice. Brielle, did I notice that when Jean was talking, you wanted to say something? Was that, or were you just gesturing? That's how you buy it.
I was like that part. I said that part when she was talking. I was saying,
oh, gotcha. Okay. You see, now if you were at an auction, you would have just bought a settee you didn't even want without knowing it. We are going to open the floor for questions. So those of you watching who want to tap the minds of your very knowledgeable panelists, now is the time to do it. I think for me, in terms of allyship, what's really important for Canada to understand is we make up 6% to 7% of the population. So we can protest and we can shout and we can write books and articles and we can do all those things, but government is never really going to respond to us because we do not make up a large enough portion of their electorate, and government cares only about the electorate. So when the other 93% or 94% of the country starts to protest, starts to write columns, starts to say this isn't okay with me. Imagine if right now, I'm in Toronto, imagine if every investment banker in the city of Toronto said to the government, I'm putting my taxes in a trust account this year. I'm withholding them from you until every First Nation has water. Imagine how quickly First Nations would get water. right? So I feel like, don't ask us, don't be online asking us, what can I do? Get woke, get active, and get political. And don't do it for a hero cookie, and don't do it so that you can tell us you did it. Do it because you fundamentally believe that it's the right thing for every person in this country, which is supposed to be one of the best countries in the world, to have potable water, because you fundamentally cannot live another day knowing that that doesn't exist. That's why you do it, not to get patted on the head or to get your hero cookie or any of those things. So that's my little soapbox speech about allyship, because I do believe that sometimes people look for the hero cookie just a little too much. Now we have our first question coming in from the viewers, and I'll let any of you you can unmute yourselves and maybe put your hand up so we know who's going to talk first. The question is there a book or movie or podcast on Indigenous feminism that includes two-spirit representation? Do any of you know? That's a good question, eh? We're all going, I'm not sure I even know a podcast on Indigenous feminism, to be honest. It looks
Leads
like
me to think somebody needs to do
Yes.
one. Maybe this is a good springboard to start. We're missing, because there's a missing voice, there's a missing representation. We see it. I mean, even within the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, there's more to that, but it seems to be where the focal point goes, right? So that intersectionality, it is hard to find, because our voices are still sort of, I mean, we're waking up, but where are we given platforms and spaces where, we have to work so hard to be able to find like how to speak to these, to these things. If anybody has recommendations, I'd certainly love to hear them and find them and watch them.
I think too, there's a fear of, we're in a spot where people are a little nervous to address certain issues too, because everyone's scared of like, I'm going to use the wrong terminology or I'm going to say the wrong thing. And I was just like, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. When you make a mistake, just apologize. I was on national TV. We were talking about pronouns. That was the point we were talking about. And I used the wrong pronoun on someone. I was devastated. And I apologized to them after and said, like, I'm so sorry. I was like caught up in the heat of what we were talking about. And, I'm not a bad person. I screwed up on that one pronoun. I apologized, and I won't make that mistake again. So you're going to make mistakes as you go along. I think from a feminist perspective, I feel transgendered men do not get near enough visibility in this, in all of North America, really. And I was thrilled when Elliot Page came out and at least got that cover of Time magazine, because in a world where everybody's pushing for a little bit of airtime, I feel that transgendered men really do not get much of it. So I was thrilled to see that Time chose that. Do we have any other questions coming in from the crowd? Because if not, I have a question that I will ask. Oh, we have another one. Any fiction-based recommendations? Oh, this is good. Any fiction-based books that you would like to recommend?
I do. You definitely need to read some Billy Ray Belcourt. You need to read, what's the name now? Of course, I get all shy now. But you need to read Ariel Twist as well. She's my two-spirit trans sister, and she's an amazing poet. If you're on Instagram, you need to follow Preston Doughton Owasis. Incredible.
Say that name again?
Preston Doughton, Thotin Owasis on Instagram. Beautiful poetry. Been a source of like my daily pandemic life. Is reading poetry by my two-spirit relatives. Who else am I watching? I'm usually good at like pop culture stuff. Like I really am. You need to be watching Pose all 3 seasons because it is stunning. You need to be watching Pose. Like I think the last season made me cry more than I needed to cry. But like honestly, if you're looking for like two-spirit, like a story told from like Black trans experience, is such an incredibly written
Are you
show.
saying Pose as in POSE?
Pose. Like Pose.
Like Pose,
like
Vogue,
Pose,
strike a pose?
Pose.
Yeah, okay,
Like
okay.
Pose. Yes, like that kind of pose. Yes, darling.
There's also a there's a television show right now on Netflix called The Coroner, and it's not, the storyline is not a two-spirited storyline, but there is a transgendered Indigenous woman with a pretty major role as a coroner in that series. And I remember just watching the series and falling off my chair when I saw her. Kylie, I'm forgetting her last name, but she is a beautiful Indigenous trans woman. So I say watch Netflix, give it the thumbs up, just so that she gets a second season, because it's lovely. That is a lovely thing when it is not a specific thing, if you know what I mean. Like if I think back to when I was young, there was a television program called Riverdale, and it was sort of like a soap opera thing of the Toronto area. And all of a sudden, for no reason, it wasn't like an Indigenous character, Jennifer Podemsky showed up and her character was a reporter. And it was not like, it wasn't like, oh, we have a role here for an Indigenous person. She got a role that was simply for a woman, and she got it. And, you know, that's where you don't need to always pigeonhole and marginalize us into these little slots. You have to let those big juicy roles be allowed. And I remember reaching out to Jennifer at the time and saying how incredible it was that she got to represent in that way. Jean and Denise, if you have anything to add, you can. If not, I've got another question for you all.
I'm reading
I don't
Johnny.
have anything. Oh, sorry.
I'm reading Johnny Appleseed, and I'm really enjoying that.
Okay. Nice.
I just wanted to say that I'm writing a book, bringing together two-spirited, feminist, anti-racist, and ecological perspectives. And it's an arts-based book, so it's looking at how can we use healing arts, you know, to tackle some of these larger questions of social change and social justice. So it didn't jump into my mind when they asked if there was a two-spirited feminist author, but I am one. So, and I'm currently writing and have written a lot of it during COVID, and it's a book of poetry and stories and other just kind of more critical race and critical theory. So just look forward to that coming out.
Excellent. Then if Jean says
I
that,
want to add something.
I'm going to shamelessly self-promote as well. HarperCollins Canada will be releasing my memoir in early 22. It is called Running Down a Dream. And it's about just that, running down your dream and keep dreaming a bigger dream for yourself. And the idea that it's just never too late, that you can just keep morphing that dream into something else. Brielle, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to say you need to read Healing Wounded Hearts by Fyre Jean Graveline. Amazing.
Oh, there you go. All right, perfect.
Parts of it, not fully, but I have.
All right, our next question for the group is, if I wanted to work with a two-spirit person to lead storytelling workshops for my organization, is there anyone you could recommend? That's good. You like that right there. Yeah, I think any of these three cats would be a decent choice.
I have taught courses in healing narratives, and the book that Brielle just mentioned, Healing Wounded Hearts, is my own healing narrative, and do a lot of work with story and art combined. So,
oh,
yeah.
Yes, Brielle. I see Brielle just put up in the comments, Teddy Surratt and Shani Steele. Teddy Surratt, it's got to be one of the most lovely human beings I have ever met. And I first met Teddy, Deborah DiGiovanni and I were doing a comedy show up in Sault Ste. Marie, and Teddy was in the audience wearing the most beautiful glitter pink shoes. And we met that night, and we hugged and we kissed, and we were like, oh, we're cosmic sisters. And then flash forward many, many years, I was given an award at the U of T about being two-spirited, and Teddy and Kent Monkman got that award the same night. It's the Bauman Award. So it was so lovely to see Teddy, and I believe I'm working with Teddy in something coming up as well. So Teddy now lives in Toronto and is an incredible person to work with.
I was going to jump, like, I know I'm a part of the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance, and we now have a website that's much better and easier to connect with us. We're also on Facebook and that. But Duma Young and John Silboy, I mean, there's so many within the Two-Spirit community and who have been sort of behind the scenes but doing tremendous work. And I know that like the medicine teachings that Duma has given and medicine walks, I know recently he was posting about anyone interested in learning more about harvesting sweetgrass, and just so it's, you know, there's many Two-Spirits who are very active. I mean, that's one of the things, one of the first teachings I was given was this circle of us at a Two-Spirit gathering, and someone said, let's go around the room and what are you doing? What sort of things are you involved in your community? And everybody was doing so much, and it's part of, I'm learning, it's part of our nature. This holding this responsibility, these two spirits really want to get the work between warrior and water keeper, you know. So I think trying to find people to get involved in things, it's, you know, do some of the research about some of the Two-Spirit alliances or coalitions or groups that are already mobilized, and then to put out that, because it's again, like, and I'm always cognizant and learning that asking like who should come in, remembering that all of us are carrying our own healing work as well, and sometimes we're asked, like, I'm aware that I have to balance, and that's actually one of the questions that I know that we didn't get into was about how do you not burn out? You know, how do we continue to carry these things? I think it's understanding that it's not always our job to teach you and to be a part of everything. Some of it is how do we work collectively together to hold each other up. So I get invited to a lot of things, sometimes having to get people to understand. I also I'm trying to live and navigate a life in a very colonial country that hits me with trauma and grief every day, and learning to manage and still thrive and grow and have a path of purpose sometimes takes a little extra work because these two spirits feel a lot. So I'm always aware when I get asked a lot of questions about send us to your experts, you know, being careful with that, because that's how we, you know, there's things we can do together as opposed to who's the most knowledgeable to come and teach you. Just felt need to throw that out there.
That's a really great point. I'm so glad that you did, and I'm glad you raised John Syllaboy. I've known John for years, but I had never seen him present before. And I hosted a 3-day health conference for the Atlantic Policy Congress, and John did a presentation on Two-Spirit that was really, really powerful, well researched, well laid out, and he's such a personable guy in general. It was fabulous. I see we're coming very close to the end of our time together. I do want to address what Denise just talked about, not just to the panelists here, but to everybody out there watching. Do you remember back before, I see you, Brielle, and I'll come to you here in a second. Do you remember back before COVID when we used to fly on airplanes? And when you would get on the airplane, the flight attendant would say to you, secure your own mask before you try to help someone else secure their mask. That's how you stay alive in a plane crash. That's how you stay alive in day-to-day life. You've got to care for yourself before you can worry about caring for others, because you can't help anybody if you're falling apart on your own. So make sure everybody secures that mask for themselves. And hey, we're in a pandemic. If you feel weird, if you feel isolated, if you feel anxious, if you feel panicked, we all do. Everybody is feeling it. At the beginning of this pandemic, I saw online people were saying things like, oh, so-and-so wrote the great novel during the Black Plague, and this is a great time for you to lose 100 pounds, and this is a great time for you to change careers. I have one goal. I want to be alive at the end of the pandemic. If I am alive at the end of the pandemic, I won. That's it. All my goals have been met. So give yourself a break. Don't put too much on you in this stressful time. I'm going to give Brielle just a second to say her last words, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I just want to say to those that were asking about bringing in speakers, make sure that you are also reaching out to our Afro-Indigenous relatives too, because they're also Two-Spirit and they're also Indigenous. So I just want to put the call to include more Black natives in our sharing circles and in our education so that they're getting the same opportunities that the rest of us are.
Excellent point. And with that, we come to the end, and I don't usually read notes, but I am going to read these notes because I don't want to miss anything as we wrap up this great panel. For those who had questions that we weren't able to get to, the NCTR will be posting the video as well as a blog with all the questions that were answered. On behalf of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, I want to thank Denise Cole, Dr. Fyre Jean Graveline, and Brielle Beardy-Linklater for joining us today. What is the best means for our audience to reach out to you? Tell us how people can find you. We'll start with you, Denise.
Yeah, I always say I'm on Facebook. My name is Denise Cole. You'll always see my face, except lately there's been an orange square there, and for right reasons. But you can also, reach out to me through Instagram. I'm on there as at Denise T. Cole. I work at the Labrador Friendship Center in Happy Valley Goose Bay. We do have a website. You can reach out to me there as well. And I wanted to take that moment to give that shout out. I'm very honored and humbled to share the panel with Brielle as well as Jean. It's truly an honor. So I hope that we three can stay connected. I sense I can learn a lot, and it is that connecting generation again, right? So I'm very happy. And thank you, Candy, as well. Yeah, like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of yours. So it was really cool to know I was going to get to share space with you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And you share a name with my wife, so of course I have an extra special spot for you. Jean, where can people find you online?
Best to find me at my email address, which is just my full name at Gmail, all lowercase. I'm also on Facebook, just under Fyre Jean. And you can also find some of my recent work at the Wheat Institute in Winnipeg, the Healing Arts Institute there. That's another place to get a hold of me. Thanks.
Great. And Brielle, where can we find you, my friend?
Well, you can always look up at the night sky. I live in between the space between the stars and the sky. Otherwise, you can look at my phone number that's clearly flashing across the screen right now. If you're wondering what that 1204 number is, that's my phone number. But you can find me on Instagram at her name is Brielle, Brielle. You can also find me at Gmail, bbeardy.linklater@gmail.com.
Wonderful. And my name is Candy Palmater. You can find me at The Candy Show on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or my webpage. It's all The Candy Show. Thank you so much to all of you who tuned in to watch today and listen to this really important conversation. There is another one coming up. The NCTR Dialogue is happening in July, which will be discussion on supporting urban Inuit relatives. So we really hope that you join us for that. Once more, thanks to these panelists, and a big shout out. You can't see them, but Kayla Johnson, who organized this whole thing, and her whole crew for bringing this all together. It's like herding cats, trying to get a bunch of us busy people all in the same place at the same time. So thanks very much. Love yourselves, and then love one another. Thank you. Bye-bye.